Hey guys, this is part 3 of the factoring video. So in this video we're going to be looking at special products. Alright, we had two sections or two parts before this where we looked at factoring out the greatest common factor and factoring by grouping in part 1, and also factoring quadratics in part 2. So make sure you check those out if you're not comfortable with those methods yet. And in this video we're going to look at factoring some special products. So the first step to factoring with special products is knowing the special product. So I have them written in this green box in the top left. So if you see you have a quadratic that matches this, you have a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. You just figure out what the a is, figure out what the b is, and then immediately factors to a plus b whole thing squared. The only difference, if you have a squared minus 2ab plus b squared, you're just going to factor that as a minus b squared instead of a plus b squared. So that's the first one. Second one is the difference of squares. So if you have a squared, which is some perfect cube or perfect square, minus b squared, which is a perfect square, you factor it as a minus b times a plus b. Alright, so be on the lookout for that. And then the third one is the difference or sum of two cubes. If it's the difference of cubes, so a cubed minus b cubed, you factor it as a minus b times a squared plus ab plus b squared. And the only difference, if you have a sum of two cubes, so you have a cubed plus b cubed, you're going to factor it as a plus b here, and then a squared minus ab plus b squared. So if you change this sign, you just have to flip this minus to a plus and this plus to a minus, similar to the first one up here. Alright, so now be on the lookout for these. It'll make your life a lot simpler if you recognize that your polynomials are actually special products. Alright, so now we're going to look at a few examples and see how we utilize these special products to help us factor. Alright, so our first one, we have 4x squared minus 1, and we want to factor this. So if we have just two terms and subtraction between them, and we want to use a special product, the only two we have is a squared minus b squared, alright, and a cubed minus b cubed. So these are our two options. We have to check to see if this function, or this polynomial, matches one of those. So 4x squared is definitely not a perfect cube, so this a cubed minus b cubed is off the table. So now the only option is a squared minus b squared. Alright, so now I have to check to see if these are perfect squares. Well, 4x squared is actually 2x whole thing squared. Alright, so if I take 2x and multiply it by itself, I get 4x squared, and of course 1 is 1 times 1, just 1 squared. So now I see that 4x squared minus 1 is actually a difference of squares. It's one perfect square minus another. Now I know I should be able to factor it like this. The only thing I have to find now is what my a and my b are. Well, a, you can see in my equation, a squared is what a is, so this thing, 4x squared, is a squared. So a is going to be whatever I square to get 4x squared. Well, that just means a is going to be 2x, right? Because 2x squared is 4x squared, and here I got a squared. Alright, minus b squared, well, what do I square to get 1? That means b equals 1. Alright, so you're looking for the thing you square to get this. Alright, and now I just use this formula here. I got a minus b, so 2x minus 1 times 2x plus 1. Alright, so you just find the square root of this first term, that goes here. Find the square root of the second term, that goes second, and just throw a minus in the first one and a plus in the second one. So that's how you factor a difference of squares. Again, just find the thing you square to get the first term and the thing you square to get the second term, and do a minus b times a plus b. So now on to the next example. We have x squared minus 6x plus 9, and we want to factor this. So in part 2, we learned how to factor quadratics, so you could just use that method for factoring. But if you recognize that this is a special product, you can save yourself a lot of time just by quickly checking that it matches this formula and then writing it as a plus b squared. Alright, but it's the first time you're seeing special products. It might not be that quick, so let's see to make sure that it is a special product. So the only special product we have with three terms on the left is these first two. So we have to see if it matches a squared minus 2ab plus b squared. So the first things I would check is if the first term and the last term are perfect squares, just like we did for the last example. So is x squared a perfect square? Yes, because x squared equals x squared. And then the last term, 9, is 9 a perfect square? Yes, because 9 equals 3 squared. So we're starting and finishing with a perfect square. So this part and that part check off. We have an a squared and a b squared. So now, if we know this, we know our a has to be x. Right, because that's the thing we square to get x squared, and our b has to be 3, because that's the thing we square to get 9. Then we know that a equals x and b equals 3. The second thing we have to check is that our middle term here, minus 6x, is the same as negative 2ab. So if we look at minus 2ab, alright, well minus 2, a we just said is x, and b we just said is 3. Alright, so negative 2 times x times 3 is negative 6. So this middle term here, minus 6x, is exactly minus 2ab. Now if we make a equal to x and b equal to 3, then a squared minus 2ab plus b squared is exactly x squared minus 6x plus 9. Alright, which means I can factor this as a is x minus b is 3, whole thing squared. And again, that's the same thing you would get if you factored this using our techniques from the last video. Alright, but if you can recognize really quickly that this is a squared minus 2ab plus b squared, you can factor it really quickly just as x minus 3, whole thing squared. So the very last example in this long factoring section is we want to factor y to the 3m plus 1. Right, so if we have just two terms and addition between them, the only way we're going to be able to factor that using a special product is if we have a perfect cube plus a perfect cube. Right, if we have a perfect square plus a perfect square, we don't have a rule for that. Alright, that can't be factored. But if we have a perfect cube plus a perfect cube, then we should be able to factor it using this formula. Alright, so the first thing to check is, are both of these perfect cubes? Well, y to the 3m, using my rules of exponents, I can actually write this as y to the m cubed. Right, you know if you take one exponent to another exponent, you multiply them, so y to the m cubed is y to the m times 3, which is what we want. And also 1, of course, is 1 cubed. So now we have that the first term is a perfect cube, and the second term is a perfect cube. So now we got to figure out what our a and our b are. Well, a is the thing we cube to get this. Right, so the thing we cube to get the first term is y to the m. Alright, so that's going to be our a, and our b, what do we cube to get the second term? Well, 1 cubed is 1, so I just want my b to be 1. Alright, and now I'm just going to go through this formula and plug in everything we need. So the first thing, a minus b, that's easy enough. A is y to the m, and b is 1. So there's a plus there. We had plus to start with, so we're going to use the red down here. So we have a plus b, so y to the m plus 1. Alright, the next term is going to be a squared. Well, if a equals y to the m, then a squared equals y to the m squared. And using the same rule we used here, this is y to the 2m. Alright, so now we know a squared is y to the 2m. The next thing we're going to have is minus. Alright, we're using the red because we had a plus to start. So minus, and then ab. Well, a times b. Again, we'll just do a is y to the m, b is 1, so we just get y to the m. Alright, so now we have a minus y to the m. And the last term, we have a plus b squared. Well, b is 1, so 1 squared is still 1. So be careful when you're factoring these difference or sum of cubes. Make sure you get your signs right. But once you find out that they are perfect cubes, figure out your a. That's going to be the thing you cube to get your first term. So here is y to the m. B is going to be the thing you cube to get your second term. Alright, so here we had 1 cubed is 1, so our b is 1. Alright, and then you just plug in to this formula. Alright, we're on the bottom because we have a plus, so we have a plus b. Alright, that's simple. And then just be careful when you're doing this middle step, a squared, we get y to the 2m, ab is just y to the m, and b squared is 1. Alright, another thing to be careful with, a lot of people, these two pieces here look similar, the very first thing I wrote in the green box and the very last thing I wrote in the green box. So a lot of times people will add this extra 2 here, alright, because they're trying to match this first term. Alright, but just be careful when we're factoring a difference or sum of cubes. There's no 2 in front of the AB, so we don't want this red 2 there. Alright, we do want this 2 in the first, but not in the last. So just be careful about that little extra detail when you're factoring a difference or sum of 2 cubes. Alright, so that was those 3 videos for all the factoring that you should know how to do. Alright, it'll be really useful going forward. Alright, so if you're not good at it, do some practice. Alright, make sure you ask questions in class if you're still confused about factoring.